Okay, we're going to have a forum now on the media and black liberation. And I got black liberation movement in America, but I guess it should be everywhere. But the United States is more developed in communications than anywhere else. And to lead this, Professor Bill McAdoo. Max taught here for at least 8 years. He's a historian. And in my own opinion, one of our most valuable colleagues, not only a scholar and a writer, but an activist. And McAdoo and I go back a long ways into Harlem in the 60s when it was really hot, you know, when there was really a revolutionary movement in this country. And I think some people who like, I was just listening to Malcolm talking about revolution, you know, people shouldn't be throwing that around. I see some Negroes who don't know revolution from a toilet, you know, writing some stuff about what a revolutionary is. They don't know revolution from feces, you know what I mean? And they need to keep their mouths closed until they find out about it. But I should say McAdoo is a man who has actually been in the revolutionary movement, has been locked up in the revolutionary movement, been struggled, so he knows what he's talking about. He's not just bumping his gums together, as some of our people do. He's the author of a book called Pre-Civil War Black Nationalism. That's one of the most advanced analyses of historical antecedents of the current movement. He's always been one of the most outspoken and political of our faculty, and I think the Dubé issue shows you how dangerous that can be. You know what I mean? His topic, the media and black liberation, is so necessary because we have to understand just how much we are influenced by our environment. And the media, certainly for those of you who watch television 28 hours a day, the media is a heavy part of your environment. So, Professor Bill McAdoo.
Thank you very much. I had prepared a paper which ran on very long, and I got to thinking about it, and I mentioned it to a couple of students who looked this way and that way, and I decided that maybe the thing to do was not to read a paper to you. But I do want to try to do some of the things that the paper was intended to do. I wanted to set out a historical review of the black experience from the period of slavery through the present, and deal with the treatment accorded the black community in the struggle for black liberation by the major mass media. Now, of course, during the period of slavery, we didn't have the TV, we didn't have the radio. We had newspapers, journals, books, magazines, and that kind of media. It goes without saying that the dominant media of that time supported the institution of slavery and presented a picture of the black American that was subhuman, that was a caricature of a human being, variously stupid, crude, unable to think analytically. They presented a picture of someone less than a human being who was only fit to be a slave. What is of concern, in addition to that, is that this image, along with other negative images of the Afro-American, continue to this day. Now, today, of course, we have television, we have radio, in addition to magazines and books and other things. But what I would like to say to you is this, that the educational institutions of this country, which are responsible for the socialization of each succeeding generation, have played a significant role in the distortion of black liberation and of the image of the Afro-American, and these two processes go together. Okay? Now, for example, there is a book called The Growth of the American Republic. Two authors of this book, Henry Steele Commager, you would probably use his books in some courses, or if not, you will. And Samuel Eliot Morison are well known. Commager, Columbia University. Morison, Harvard University. Two co-authors of this book. The book is used today, and the quotation that I'm going to read to you is an assessment of the black experience by these two white professors currently in vogue in a book which is used throughout the United States. Okay? As for Sambo, they say, as for Sambo, whose wrongs moved the abolitionists to wrath and tears, there is some reason to believe that he suffered less than any other class in the South from its peculiar institution. The majority of the slaves were adequately fed, well cared for, and apparently happy. Competent observers report that they performed less labor than the hired men of the northern states. Although brought to America by force, the incurably optimistic Negro became attached to the country and devoted to his white folks. Slave insurrections were planned, usually by free Negroes, but invariably betrayed by some faithful black. Trained obedience kept most slaves faithful throughout the Civil War. This is the assessment by two of America's leading historians of the black experience. They begin their assessment with the word Sambo. At this modern time, this modern age. Is there any wonder why someone who goes to Columbia University and who perhaps lives in Queens would not think twice about taking a baseball bat and hitting a black person on the head? But let's go back to the period of slavery. I want to go and take 15 or 20 minutes to sketch out some history for you, and then I would like to open the floor for discussion. Okay. During the period of slavery, the essential feature of the institution is that it was based upon slaves who were owned as property by masters and who were engaged in the production of staple crops: sugar, cotton, rice, etc. And that these staple crops were crops sold on the world market and therefore subject to the fluctuations, the depressions, the panics, and so forth, the cycles of the world market. There was no basic protection for the slave. The boss treated the slave the way any other boss treats a slave. The slave was controlled by a series of laws. You do not make laws to control the behavior of those who are docile, who are submissive. But slaves were not allowed to learn to read and write. It was a crime to teach a slave to read and write. Slaves were not allowed to assemble outside the presence of a white man. Okay? Slaves were not allowed to carry or bear arms or to travel freely from one destination to another without a special pass or without being accompanied by a white man. Okay? Laws were made governing the most minute details of behavior of a slave. Okay? The majority of the United States Army prior to the Civil War was located in the South. There was a regular system mandated by law in the states of patrols, of armed patrols, specifically to keep slaves in their place. And states and communities had their own guards. The master was armed, the overseer was armed. An overwhelming array of force was displayed against the slave, and yet and still, black people rebelled. Black people committed sabotage. They even took their own lives and the lives of their children to prevent them from being misused in slavery. Black people burned plantations. They assassinated masters. They broke tools. They sabotaged in every way possible. In fact, when you consider that prior to the Civil War, black people endured 2 centuries of slavery, the record indicates that the struggle that they waged over these centuries was the most heroic struggle ever known in the history of mankind. Because tell me some other struggle that took 2 centuries to complete. Tell me about another struggle where such heroism was shown, both by named and unnamed individuals. Harriet Tubman. Everyone knows that Harriet Tubman rescued countless black people from slavery, and she was armed when she did it. And if a slave said, "I can't make it," she put the pistol to his head and said, "You will die or you will be free." Okay? Harriet Tubman was a spy and a nurse and a guerrilla in the Union Army during the war. Harriet Tubman led black and white soldiers on missions behind Southern lines during the Civil War, and on the most prominent of which, she freed 756 black slaves, brought them back to the North and freedom. Okay, but Harriet Tubman is a person who is known about. Sojourner Truth is known about. Frederick Douglass is known about. But there are countless hundreds of black men and women, and even children, who resisted slavery in a multitude of ways. Yet we are told by historians like Henry Steele Commager, Samuel Eliot Morrison, from their comfortable chairs at Columbia University and Harvard University, that black people were delightful slaves, that they liked their white folks, that they did not resist. Oh yes, there were a few troublesome free blacks, because you see, freedom is something that a black person cannot have if you want to live with it. Okay, the only blacks they were worried about were the free blacks. How did they worry about the free blacks? The colonial, movement to colonize blacks in Africa and Latin America began at the turn of the century, of the last century. They did not want to colonize slaves to Africa or Latin America. Who did they want to colonize? They wanted to colonize the free blacks. Because as long as you had free blacks in a system that, unlike other systems of slavery throughout the world and throughout history, a system that was based on racism, on color, as long as you had free blacks, you had the potential for rebellion, insofar as those who wished to colonize the blacks felt. Okay? Now, when we come to the point of the Civil War, I might say that the decade before the Civil War represented a period of the most intense struggle by black people on their own behalf to seek freedom. Black people did more to bring about the Civil War by their struggles than history in America, written history in America, allows. The facts are these. The major media in America has distorted and concealed the history of, the true history of slavery and of the black Americans' resistance to it. Even when we consider the abolitionist movement and the Liberator, which is the main newspaper of the abolitionist movement, it lasted from its founding in 1831 until the Civil War, the early years of the Civil War. Even that newspaper, and I might say, as a preference to what I'm going to say about the abolitionists, that the abolitionists were very brave and mostly principled people. They suffered very, very greatly in the cause of freedom for black people. They went to prison. They were killed. They faced derision. They were tormented and tortured in many different ways. Having said that, and I think we should all have balance in this matter, having said that, I will now say this. The abolitionist movement, like other movements in this country where racism was king, also suffered from racism. And the publications which they advanced, the Liberator and other publications, condemned black people who thought for themselves, because William Lloyd Garrison was what was known in that day as non-resistant. He believed in non-resistance, that black people should be, as they say today, non-violent. However, Henry Highland Garnett, and a number of other black people believed that slaves had as much right to rise up and rebel against their enslavement as the American colonies had to rise up against Britain. But apparently, the whites of that day believed that what was white was right. If a white man did it, that was right. If a black man did it, that was intolerable. And therefore, they condemned Henry Highland Garnett, who was really a great man of black liberation. They condemned him for publishing his great work, The Call to Rebellion, which was a call for black slaves to rebel, and circulating it in the South. It got so bad that Frederick Douglass and Martin R. Delaney is an early pre-Civil War black nationalist, got together, and in 1847, they got out a newspaper, a black abolitionist newspaper. I might say this, that black abolition societies predated the white societies. Blacks had abolitionist societies before the white societies developed in the 1831. And blacks got out abolitionist newspapers prior to that time. There was a reason for it. And the reason was that even the best of friends of the black person, those who opposed slavery, were tainted with racism. Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was a bestseller in 1852. It is a sad commentary to note that this book was touted as an improved image of the black American, especially when you read the book and understand that it promoted some of the most vile racist stereotypes about black Americans around, and that it smacked of that racist paternalism that we today associate with white liberal managership in the black community, and in Stony Brook, and in other places in this country. Okay? I mean that specifically. William Lloyd Garrison opposed the resort to violence on the part of slaves, opposed slave rebellion. So, of course, opposed John Brown, a white revolutionary. John Brown was not an abolitionist. He was a revolutionary, a man who deserves a lot more respect than to call him an abolitionist. Okay? They opposed him. Not only that, they opposed blacks who wanted to participate in the electoral process. Obviously, blacks could not vote in most places, but they did participate in some political activities. The white abolitionist movement, the Garrisonite school, opposed them because they believed that the Constitution was a document that upheld slavery. That was the reason for doing it. Whereas the blacks, like Langston, and Frederick Douglass, and others, believed that any weapon that could be brought to bear against slavery and for the freedom of the black population was legitimate and necessary. Okay? So we had a process where blacks found a need to establish their own independent newspapers because some of the abolitionists opposed their views, all right, and had an attitude, a racist, paternal attitude, which said, well, in effect, we think you should be free, but we sort of agree with the slave master that you don't know what to do with freedom. You don't know what to think. We agree you're non-analytical. Okay? They found another way to call black people Sambo. It was nicer. It was sweeter. And of course, sympathy was the thing that they were attempting to bring out of whites who they approached. Not justice, sympathy. Look at this creature, burdened down in the way he is whipped by the lash, his children taken away. Harriet Beecher Stowe believed that black people should be colonized in Africa. If you read the foreword and afterword of her book, she says specifically that. She doesn't beat around the bush. She did not have a place in America for Uncle Tom. Of course, he died in the book. He sacrificed himself like a good Christian for Simon Legree, the master who whipped him to death. Okay. I think that was wishful thinking on Harriet Beecher Stowe's part, because not too many people were willing to follow that course. Okay. But we have in the media in America a tradition, a heritage of racism, a heritage of elitism, okay, that is so deeply rooted in the American system and in American economics that it would be unthinkable to believe that it was shaken by the Civil War or by the events of the 1960s. And those of us who now look at the news and who are part of the present generation in New York realize when we read the papers that we are getting a story that is conditioned by racism. Now you all know, I think probably, that 4 black journalists are suing the Daily News at this time for racism because they have not been treated in accordance with their skills and in accordance to their performance. They have been treated in racist ways, and on top of it have been called names, and on top of it have been punished for having the audacity to go to court. Now I might say that one of the restrictions that I didn't mention about the slave and his rights is that the slave had no rights to go to court against a white man. In any case that involved a white man, a slave had no right to go to court. Now, Daily News is punishing these, and so the punishment is becoming part of the case. Also, to defend the 4 black journalists have made this part of the case. It's not news. Look at what has happened now. In the last day or two, we have been told a story. We know about Michael Stewart. We know something about what happened in Queens, don't we? But we have been told a story about a man with a name that sounds like an Arabic name, who was killed by the police. He was hog-tied, tied hand and foot, and thrown into a cell and left hog-tied. I mentioned his name had an Arabic sound. Maybe he's a Muslim. Who knows? The paper left it like that, didn't it? But this man, they said, had cocaine in his blood, that he was attempting to break into an apartment. This is the story we heard. This is a story we heard before there was any outcry by the black community. But now an outcry is beginning about this man. And the story is slowly changing. Now he's a transit worker. He has been elevated eons above a burglar, a rapist, a no-good, low-down bum. He's a worker. He's a black transit worker. And now there's, I think, an attempted break-in. Not a break, maybe an attempted break-in. The man might have been looking for help. He may have been knocking on the wrong door, thinking he was, you know, going to a house of someone he knew. No one knows. He's dead now. Now it's not a break-in anymore. It's an attempted break-in. Okay? The medical examiner said there were no signs of brutal force. The cops said they had difficult time subduing the man, and he had a knife. I haven't heard the knife repeated either. Cops carry a knife around to throw on you when they want to hit you in the head. You understand? I haven't heard the knife repeated in the most recent reports. How can you struggle with somebody like that, and you know when they're struggling like that, as a normal course, they're hitting them on the head with clubs? We all know that who've been in a struggle. Okay? We know what the deal is. They're hitting them on the head with clubs. All right? And the only thing that the medical examiner can find is cocaine in his blood. It's the only thing he can find. And the reason that that is mentioned, why is that mentioned? To knock him down, to characterize him in a certain way. Okay? And when the truth comes out about this, are we going to have another Michael Stewart? And now, let's go back to Queens. I didn't want to leave that too soon. And then we'll come to some, you know, like the Statesman, for example. Let's go to Queens. What did we hear when we first read the newspapers, and what did we hear when we first saw the television? We heard there were 3 black people. Nobody knew what they were doing in this white neighborhood. We think their car broke down. Okay, and it may have been a racial incident. They were attacked by a gang of whites, and one was killed escaping. Okay, and that one killed escaping is an interesting dilemma, okay? Because it turns out he was chased into oncoming traffic on purpose and not allowed to return to safety. That's what it turns out as, okay? But at first there is a district attorney whose name is Santucci, who has never been known to be a friend of anybody but the people in that community, okay? He has never been known to be a friend to Asians, Hispanics, or blacks, okay? And at first they only got 2 or so, maybe 3 white men, one of whom, by the way, is South African, okay? And they interrogated the 2 of the remaining black men, and when the black men attempted to tell them their story, they treated them like the criminals. And they grilled them, and they tried to change their stories and do all kinds of things. And so the black brothers wisely shut up and went to get legal help. And fortunately, they found 2 black lawyers who hadn't sold out. In my mind, I say yet. I don't suspect them of anything, but in my mind, I always say yet, because I've been around. Okay? You never know. The governor might offer him something one day. But in any case, on the way up, they have not yet sold out. All right? Now, what happens? Let's look at this. During slavery, one of the weapons that the master had is that he sowed divisions between the poor white and the black slave using racism. No matter, he said to the poor white, how low you get, you're not as low as a black man. Okay? But he also sowed divisions among black people. And specifically, the house Negro was used against the field Negro. And the house Negro was usually lighter skinned than the field Negro. Okay? And the house Negro was treated better than the field Negro. Okay? So now we come back to Queens in 1987, and we look around and we find out that here we now have the medical examiner's report on this case, and we have the police coming in, and lo and behold, we find as police commissioner a house Negro as police commissioner, right? A house Negro as police commissioner. And what does he do? He condemns the victims and their lawyers, doesn't he? What does Mayor Koch do? Well, we expect of him what he did. We expect the racism that he has always displayed in office. We expect it of him, all right? What did he do? He condemned them also. Why didn't you come forth and tell your story to the grand jury, meaning to Santucci? Okay? No, there was an outcry by the black community. The black community is beginning to say, no more. You have turned the clock back far enough. We are getting ready. We are coming on the march. Get ready for another slave revolt. Okay? And someone wishing to be president listened very hard. He said, you know, those natives are restless. We are in for some trouble. I want to be on the good side of the trouble so I can ride it on into the House, meaning the White House. Okay? And so he did take the suggestion of the 2 black lawyers representing the brothers, both the dead and the alive brothers. He did take the suggestion. He named a special prosecutor. And lo and behold, we don't come up with 3, we come up with 12. Now we have 12. We have a lynch mob of 12. And one of them, to save his hide, squealed. He squealed. And he told that they purposely chased the brother out in the street and wouldn't let him get back. And he told about the plans to cover up this whole thing. Okay? Now where is the house Negro and the mayor and Santucci? Well, Santucci is saying, well, I'm glad someone was able to do what I couldn't do. He's right, he couldn't do it. Because he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to sell out the folks who put him there and who he's and the bums who are going to pay him off. Okay. And you know what is so striking about this? In the mayoral administration, that is one of the most corrupt in the history of New York since Tammany Hall. Yeah? Since Tammany Hall. One of the most corrupt. That he didn't have better judgment in this matter than to believe that the black community would let it lay and let themselves be represented in the way that this professor, Henry Steele Commager, and Samuel L. Morrison's represented black people. Sambo, they said, who was contented to be a slave, who did not rebel, a total misrepresentation of Afro-American history. He didn't mention Harriet Tubman. He didn't mention Sojourner Truth. He didn't mention Frederick Douglass, Henry Highland Garnett, who had escaped from slavery and educated himself. Okay? He didn't mention Dr. John S. Rock, the first black man in American history to be accepted to the bar of the Supreme Court of the United States, and a revolutionary nationalist. Okay? He didn't mention the untold black rebels who led slave rebellions, Gabriel, any of them. Okay? He mentioned the word Sambo. Okay? Now, there is a kind of paternalism that I'm sure some of you have seen and experienced. I experienced it to this day. I don't accept it, but it's around. Many of my colleagues demonstrate it. The institution here is set up so that we are victims of it. We are Africana studies. We begs for what we get. And then we get crumbs. And then, when we open our mouths to speak up, to say we will not sell out, we will not sell out a generation that we fought for. Now, we went to jail for them to be here. We had our heads beaten for them to be here. We made many sacrifices for them to be here. Okay? We will not sell them out. We will not lie to them. Whether it be a lie about their history or a lie about their skills. Okay? We will not do it. We will not just be a busy work outfit. Okay? That feeds students pablums and tell them how delightful they are to be colored. Okay? We want the best. But when we do not do these things, and when we stand up and forthrightly talk about world affairs, because we are in this world, and do you realize that the majority of this world is non-white? See, when we do that, we are attacked as Professor Dubé has been attacked. As you well know, he has been banished. You all thought that banishment was just something that happened in South Africa, but that's not true. He has literally been banished. He has been told in a letter which I have read, he cannot get tenure here. He can no longer work here, but we will allow him to go seek out a job at another unit in the SUNY system. We will allow him. And if they want to give him tenure after a certain period, if they want to hire him, indeed, if they want to hire him, especially after what has been said about him and what has been done, and the problems you have, you're not just hiring anybody, you understand? They may hire him. Okay, and why? Because in his classroom, he spoke out. He spoke out for people having the right to examine and to question, regardless of the fact that there were powerful pressure groups, okay, in this process at Stony Brook and in the state of New York and nationally and even internationally, who might not like what is being said in his classroom, who might not indeed like what I am saying to you here today. You may be sure they do not like it. Okay? And as I will not say what is in the back of my mind because it's not important, it's more subjective than objective. But in any case, I don't care. I don't care what they don't like. Okay? Because when you paid a certain price, okay, when your life has been questioned, when your very life has been threatened, what can they do to you? Okay? What can they do to you that matters? Now, I want to throw open the floor at this point, but I want to say this, that in my 8 or so years here at Stony Brook, I've had occasion to read many newspapers. There are many things that I could say about them. I have not in the past said very much to students about them, except on a very private level. But what I will say is this. I was struck one year, not too long ago, I had this issue at home when Halloween came around, and the Statesman had a costume contest, and 2 of the costumes were Aunt Jemima characters, white young men dressed in aprons, bandanas, painted their face black, lips red, and so forth, okay? And this was printed in the Statesman. I thought it was a new low, but it was not uncharacteristic, because if you open the Statesman 9 times out of 10, there is nothing about anything that isn't white. Okay? It's a rare occasion. Okay? So the newspapers here on this campus, just as the professors here on this campus, reflect the institutional racism here on this campus. And this campus reflects the institutional racism which dominates in America. Because America indeed is a land of institutional racism, from the White House down. Okay? In terms of the non-white press, I have this to say. I'm very, very happy with some of the new developments in Black World. There are, of course, other non-white, at least one other non-white newspaper on campus, which is the more narrow, more limited development. I'm not even sure that it reaches the minority community outside of its own group, even when it's out on the floor. But in any case, I'm very happy because I remember various periods of development in Black World. I remember an early period of radicalism, where there were many good articles and poems and many good causes being fought for. And then we hit a period of low. And I feel that in reading some of the more recent things, and the format of the paper and so forth, that we are moving forward, but we do have a long way to go. Okay? We do have a long way to go. I think these issues in the community and in the world, in Africa, what is happening in South Africa, what is happening in Angola, Mozambique, what is happening in Russia indeed, and in China, this is our business. This is our business. We are world thinkers. We are not limited to one continent or to one city or one state, okay? And I think that our publications have to reflect it. And most of all, they have to tie this in with the interest of the students on this campus. I think we have to remember that if it's a publication on this campus, that it must represent the students on this campus. Okay, I'd like to throw the floor open by asking you a question, and then you may ask any questions you want and deal with any questions you want to deal with. What do you feel? What do you feel in terms of your being a student is the most critical issue in your life at this time?
I think it's moving, I feel that most critical, one of the most, I can't just narrow it to one particular thing, but I think one of the most critical issues in my life right now is just survival, because I see as a black man and as a collective member of black people, we're under more attack, just as much, I see the attack being more complex now than the fire hoses and the lashings, but I see us under attack. I really do. I see with this, and I see it escalating with the Howard Beach thing, now with the other brother, and then there's several other isolated incidents that are sort of what you could say, they're covered up and they're sort of suppressed to, you know, not let, the media does play on it and not let everybody know what your neighbor knows, you know what I mean? They don't want everybody to know the same thing at the same time. And you have incidents with some Muslim brothers in Brooklyn were written in neighborhood of some drugs and things like this, and yet they were thrown in jail and treated like criminals. And so I think one of the most critical things right now is survival. How can I not only look out for myself, but continue to show my strength for my people, you know what I'm saying? Like, 'cause it's not even about self. I mean, anybody that come from any neighborhood, is particularly a neighborhood like I came from, in the project, you know you just can't look out for self. You can say yeah, I'm going for self, but it never ends up like that. It never ends up like that. You always got to end up looking out for somebody. Even if you're going to do something wrong, you got to bring somebody with you.
Someone has to look out.
You know what I'm saying? So you have a certain responsibility, and you at the same time you wanna define this responsibility to yourself, as well as look out for what's coming directly at you. So that's what I see as just plain old survival. I mean, like, administratively, if you want to look at it in the campus-based type thing, the institutional attack we're under here. I mean, it's like, come on, I've seen several events surface right here in campus, with, like you mentioned earlier about the statesmen and how they do us, and you look at the Africana Studies Department budget and how they do us there. You know, it's like, I don't know. I think something like that has to be open to forum and discussion, because it's a very complex attack, but you know, it can definitely be handled. You know what I'm saying? But it's going to take a collective type of thing, and I'd just like to know what you think would be coming out of the '60s, a time that, you know, I missed because I just wasn't here. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I read one paper on campus, and it's not a white paper, and it shall remain nameless. And I heard some comments by people associated with the paper who said that blacks have really done nothing to gain their freedom. That black radicals have betrayed radicalism, that they're comfortable professors in universities, and so forth and so on. And this is by people who have never done anything, okay? People who use the word radical, for example, when the word radical doesn't mean anything. You're either a radical student, you're a radical doctor, you're a radical lawyer, you're a radical carpenter, plumber, you understand, hat maker, but you're a radical something. But these people are radical nothings. They have never done anything, okay? And yet they use that term, okay? I think the question of survival has to do basically with what you just outlined. First of all, the recognition that is a collective process. And second of all, raising of our level of consciousness about ourselves and each other. Okay? Because unless we ourselves adopt a view about survival, and not just survival for the sake of survival, understand, but a struggle to win. We don't just want to exist, we want to excel in our struggle, you understand? But unless we become conscious, okay, and extrapolate from our position in the community and our experiences in the community to our position here and elsewhere, we're not going to achieve what we need to achieve. All right? And one of the things we need to achieve is a clear understanding of where we're going and how we're going to get there. And that we're going to do it together or we're not going to do it at all. I think that my perspective is that we are heading into a revolutionary period. Okay? And I think that everybody should get ready for it. And I prefer to live during such periods. Okay? Things move a lot more quickly. The meaning is a lot deeper. Okay? Things are, of course, a lot more serious and extreme. But I prefer such periods, and I prefer such struggles. Okay? And it does show you where everybody is at. The weak do fall away, and the strong stay and fight. And the many leaders are developed. And I think that among you and this generation, we will have a new group of leaders, men and women, all right, who will take the struggle to a much, much higher stage, all right? But I think that you have been very perceptive in saying that the most critical thing on your mind is survival. Because as I look at the situation, it is probably the most critical thing on my mind, too. Okay, and I speak of it collectively, not just personal for myself. How do some of the rest of you feel?
Well, I'm not going to really talk about myself. This has to do with my younger brother. My younger brother is playing basketball at this present time in high school, and a lot of coaches from a lot of schools, want him to play for them. And now, as you look in the paper, they're raising the SAT score for blacks, particularly blacks, because blacks dominate the area of basketball and sport. They're raising the SAT score and decreasing the number of scholarships for blacks to go to these major division schools. And in my opinion, I feel that it's unfair because they know that the whites score higher on the SAT scores because they get the premium at their high schools more often than black students do, which is true. And in my opinion, I don't feel that it's fair because I think that they're getting upset because basketball is dominated by the black man. If you look, even in the pros, it's dominated by them, and they want to stop this. And in the area of sports, I feel that they're getting, it's like they're trying, I don't know what they're trying to do, they're just trying to stop the blacks from getting forward because they see that they're gaining recognition from the area of sports, and they're just trying to stop them from gaining this recognition.
Now, your brother's objective is to go to college.
Yes, he's going, well, he has a 85 average in high school. He didn't take the SATs yet. He's only in 11th grade, and he's been given letters. He has stacks of letters like this already, to go to these major Division I schools, which are schools like Purdue, Iowa, University of Michigan, Syracuse, St. John's, Providence, St. Paul, a lot of schools. They want him. He's only 11th grade. And as we look in the paper now, they're raising the SAT scores. This is for everyone in order to get into these schools. And if you look at a lot of the basketball players, they can't even get a 600 on the SAT. And I don't think it's fair.
Comments?
Yeah, if I can expand on that. What I see with that particular situation and similar situations is nothing more than the filtering down of the current policies adopted by the administration, like Reaganomics type thing. We're under attack, you understand? And we ain't get nothing unless none of the traditional things, or the things, I can't even call them traditional, things that you might have. One thing when I was talking with Gil Scott, I had the opportunity to talk with him, and he was telling me that one of the most important things that brothers and sisters have to remember today, that the things that allowed them to be in the positions they are today, like you said earlier about it was your struggles then that allowed us to be in school and things now, these things don't stop. They're constantly under attack. Just like the man who was 20 years ago, who was attacking us as old racists, he raised his child to be an old racist, so he is now the attacker. So just what he was saying in a nutshell was, we can't get comfortable, and when things like that surface, when it's able to filter down to a level that even we feel it, directly, and not even just some administrative paper shuffling. You know what I mean? A lot of things goes on and off. No, it's not even. The action has been stepped up. We feel it directly, like this is across the board. And we gonna put it in the paper. And then they will. Not only that, they will surface a story about Lloyd Daniels, the brother who's and he's in the cracks and all this. But what about all this thing? What is he doing there, 19 years old, out here with no diploma? You know what I'm saying? He was already exploited and was ready to be chiefly exploited until he just, went. I guess I don't even know the true story, so I can't even, respond to it properly. Yeah, but the thing was, see that type of story coupled with the need for a higher SAT score is nothing more than propaganda. It's like they go hand in hand. Like the same thing with the brother who's in Queens, the Muslim brother. It's no coincidence, I don't think, that just a few weeks ago you had some Muslim brothers knocking on some door, getting a crack house out the neighborhood. Now we got a crack crazed Muslim beating up on 8 cops, 8 grown men now.
Right.
He's beating up on 8 cops, and then
And what precinct were they from, pray tell?
I probably
77?
77
Yeah.
precinct.
77, the one, the precinct in my neighborhood,
In the
right?
city, yeah.
Yeah, the same precinct where they had to transfer the entire top echelon,
Everyone.
all of the leadership out for doing what? For selling crack,
Selling it, yeah.
for taking
One
money off
for
of drugs and prostitution.
Yes,
That same precinct where they transferred over 50% of the patrolmen out of the precinct for corruption. Okay, beating up Muslim brothers who wanted to kick a crack house out of the building. Okay, didn't arrest the people in the crack house, arrested the Muslim brothers. Yes.
I happen to be a firm believer in Malcolm X and his ideology. And in studying Malcolm X, I realized that he sought outside help outside of America in dealing with Afro-American problems. And he went to Mecca, he went to many places, and he realized that we need outside help. Not we in America, blacks in America alone, not going to do much. So that's why he went into the OAU, and he sought unification of all blacks, Africa all over. And his primary goal was to bring the struggle in Black America as a world issue in the United Nations. If anybody who follows Malcolm X would know. So I want to know if, with this revolution that I'm speaking of, if it can be accomplished without outside help, since I haven't heard from anybody in here of, I haven't heard of anybody speaking of outside help or getting help from other communities.
I think on that same note, what could possibly be sort of a catalyst in a chain of events that would lead to a revolution very well may be the South African thing. These people over here gain their freedom. I don't think they're gonna just turn their head and just go into building. Who knows, that one event over in that country of South Africa, in that part of Africa, might be just enough to start a whole world type thing. You never know what could come out of that.
I think internationalism, as I call it, is one of the most important features of any true movement for liberation. Okay, an identity with national liberation movements throughout the world is essential. However, there is no movement that has ever been, no people that has ever been liberated by an outside movement. And Malcolm X was a firm believer in black people uniting together and not allowing themselves to be divided and fighting for their own self-determination. He said this many times. He said, don't look for someone to come and save you, save yourself. I'm using my words, but I'm paraphrasing what Malcolm X said. We who came up during that period know him. So I think your point about internationalism is very, very important. But I think the critical thing is that we have to liberate ourselves. We cannot ask someone else to do it for us. Okay? We cannot beg someone else to do it for us. Malcolm X did not get his support in terms of his support in America from the outside. He got moral support from the outside, but his basic support was here from the black community. And I might add, those people who assassinated him were bought and paid for as assassins, drawn out of a certain low-down echelon in the black community. Okay. More questions? Comments? Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm hoping that this won't be the last time that we have occasion to address the subject of the medium black liberation. I think there's a great deal more to be said about it, and a great deal more to be thought about in reference to it. And I'm hoping that in the next coming months that we can address it again, and with even larger audience if possible. Thank you very much.